Join me once again in welcoming writer-director Anna Isabelle Matutina. It is really a pleasure to be able to sit once again with a budding artist who's female, who's making films about females, and who's doing that in a system that is so, well, must be very difficult, even more difficult if you were, yeah.
A woman.
Yeah, a woman, it's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, it's, that's why it took me a long time to get to my first feature. I mean, I've been making short films since 2004.
So almost 20 years this year.
Yeah.
Congratulations for surviving this long without making a feature.
Yeah, it's hard to get opportunities there, especially with a very male-dominated industry. And I know I'm not the first one who said it. Like it's also in every other industry. It's not just in film.
Right, and also not just in the Philippines.
Yeah.
What we'd like you to do, if you have a question, and we hope you have questions, please summon one of the runners on the side. They have cards, and we'd like you to write your questions on cards, and then we'll get to those in a little while. First, I'm going to have a conversation. So, this is your first feature after almost 20 years as a filmmaker and a documentarian. Why this film? Why did you decide on this story?
Well, first of all, of course, it's a very personal film. And I was at that stage in my life where I was also turning 40. So, and I wanted to have kids, and I thought about, do I really want to have kids in this kind of climate? And at that point also, at the same time, while I was feeling there's so much pressure about having children, another friend found herself pregnant, and she was in a very toxic relationship, and she had no plans of having children, but by the time she found out she was pregnant, it was too late. Like, she was already 5 months pregnant. So there were a lot of questions in my head, and that was my way of confronting even my internal misogyny by writing the script and then having it done.
I'm so glad it's not semi-autobiographical.
Of course, it's not.
So tell me about making this decision that Alice should also not only have this internal conflict, but also this sort of external conflict, which is the Marawi crisis that was happening at the same time that the film was set in 2017, right?
Yeah, because that was the second year under the Duterte regime, and it was really, really bad. And in order to be able to process the things that were happening, I had to start writing, because it was just too much, and it's hard for a woman who knows the suffering that is going on everywhere. And of course, you also have your personal stuff that was happening in your life. And most of the frontliners are women, you know. And even when the Marawi thing happened, we were there for the women, the mothers. So, and that was the time when my friend who was pregnant also came to Marawi with me. Yeah, so I was with her, and because the main problem then was like the mothers didn't have milk for the children, or they don't have sanitary napkins. So how do you even begin to process what you're going through, the trauma that you're going through in your life when you're seeing so much violence around? I'm sorry, I'm very emotional. Okay. I said I wasn't going to cry, but yeah.
Shall we change subjects real quick?
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the reception of the film in the Philippines, where it was actually selected as the best Philippine film of 2022 by the Critics Society. This is a big thing.
Yeah, it was a surprise. I didn't expect that. It's not the most popular film because it's kind of hard to sell films like this, especially when we were looking for funding. You know, it's like one person told me like, I don't know how to sell your film. And what was going through inside my head was like, okay, women's stories do not sell. And that was kind of hard to swallow. So we really had to limit the budget. So we shot that in 8 days. And it was consecutive, so it was exhausting. So we really cut a lot of things. And yeah, I just didn't want to accept that I would have to rewrite my film because another man told me that they couldn't sell it.
Thank you for not rewriting it and sticking with that, and even with a small budget. But you know, you mentioned the budget to me before, and that's actually not as small as it is in some other places. So, okay, bravo. And 8 days, we've heard here some people also having to shoot in
apparently
a really
I'm lucky
fast
to
time.
have to do 8 days.
A luxury.
Because the practice now in the Philippines is you do a film in 5 days. Yeah, that's the...
Do you all understand how crazy that is? I mean, independent film in the US, you're never shooting for less than, I don't know, 3 weeks. Is that true, filmmakers in the audience? Yeah. I would say 3 weeks. And that sounds like, oh my God, that's not enough time. But okay, let's talk about the aesthetics then. You have this long career making documentaries. And it feels to me, especially the opening sequence, which is really interesting, which really sort of sets the scene for us, introduces us to Alice, and we see what's going on. How did you decide this is the aesthetic style that I'm going to go for?
Yeah, I mean, from the very start, even when I started pitching the film, I knew that my documentary background was going to come into play in how I treat the film, because I wanted it as authentic as possible, because it's not an easy story to tell, especially most of the conflict is happening internally. And it's like some would say the story can get melodramatic, and I wanted to avoid that. So I took my documentary background and aesthetics into the film. But yeah, just with the first shot, I already wanted to focus on the perspective. This is going to be her story, her version of things. Every scene is with her in it. And yeah, I'm kind of used being like, whenever I interview subjects, it's usually like that. You have someone there and then they bear everything. And I wanted those awkwardness, the awkward silences, which when I'm doing a documentary, I usually edit those out, you know, because it's for TV. But here I wanted it there because it says more with the silences when you know she's not really telling the truth, but she has to appear as if she's like feeling okay in front of the camera or in front of whoever's interviewing her. So that was my angle for that.
And how did you find Max Eigenmann? She's fantastic in this part.
Yeah.
And also won Best Actress at Cinemalaya Film Festival, along with your NetPAC award win. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I actually didn't know her before doing this film. I don't know her films because the other films where she played as lead hasn't been shown in the Philippines. But I was actually, that was a last minute casting, and she was the most important piece of the cast. I was working with 2 other actresses, and then the schedule didn't happen. And then I was encouraged to get her because, according to my script consultant, she can surprise you, and that she did. And I was also very adamant about getting a real-life mother and daughter to play as mother and daughter in the film.
So Grace is her Max's real mom.
Yeah, because you know the reality of you're shooting for 8 days and you want all the tension there already. It makes my job easier. So you don't, you know, even after I say cut, they're still like playing themselves. Yeah.
So, I mean, that line, you know, I mean, she repeats it several times about, you know, I seriously thought of aborting you sort of thing. I mean,
Yeah.
what a lovely thing to say to your living daughter. Is that based on their relationship, on a personal
Well,
sort of...
there it is. It's aside from it being based on their relationship, it's a very Filipino thing. It's something I've heard everywhere, especially when mother and daughters don't disagree. Like, you know, I could have aborted you. Like, it's almost like it's something used very casually. It's because we're very Catholic, I think we're the only Asian country that's predominantly Catholic. So shame and guilt is built in our culture. So that's one of the things that we have to go through all the time with our parents.
Fabulous. And had these two ever worked together, these two actresses?
Yes, they have, but not as much as like this, that not as intense as they had to do here.
Indeed. Okay. I didn't realize this when I was watching the film.
So it
and
was more
only
difficult
later.
for Max, I think, because it's like she could never rest because her mother is there. Like, it's like, imagine having your mother around you all the time. I mean, and then having to work with her, like.
And on something as intense as
Yeah.
this with a not lovely relationship. Great film. How was the decision of lack of soundtrack, in other words, music, and the silence, you know, became deafening? How did you make that decision?
I think
And it also says mabuhay.
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 Thank you. Yeah, because I am a fan of Asghar Farhadi and the way he makes films, and it also emphasizes the documentary feel of the film. Like, it's like you're watching real life happen right in front of you. And I just didn't, because I think everything is so subtle and everything is so internalized, and I didn't want to use music to manipulate the audience. Like, I was too scared to use music. I relied on sound design. Like, yeah, I'm doing fiction, but I want it to feel as real as possible. So, and I think it works better with the kind of treatment that I was doing with the handheld and the gritty, dark lighting. And yeah.
Right. Someone else asked about why was everything so shaky, and I think this handheld camera and lack of... was there ever a time, because of course searching for authenticity, there's still moments where you think you might have overdone something. Was there ever a time that you stepped back and said, okay, you know, this looks too good, or this sounds too good, or we need to make it more authentic and less polished?
Well, what happened was, because there's really no time to process while shooting. Everything happened in post-production where we had to delete scenes. Yeah, like, okay, this is not working. It doesn't feel authentic enough. And I'm sure there are still scenes I'd love to cut out from that cut because I don't know. I mean, of course, every film could be better the more that you watch it. That's why I don't like watching it anymore.
Yeah, you say anymore. Have you actually watched it projected ever?
I wish I could here in the Lincoln Center because I'm sure you have a very good projector. But I've watched it a lot of times in the Philippines for the first festival run, because that's where I saw the DCP was incorrect. I had to check all those things, and if the sound was like, yeah. So I watched it a lot of times, and I'm just like,
okay, but now you're...
And I was also editing it, so I'm just done with it. Like, I want to move on.
This you've answered a bit. If you'd like to elaborate on it, this decision to set it during the Marawi crisis and during the Duterte regime, how it affected the storytelling?
Yeah, it was also part of my intention for the film to zero on the systemic oppression and the cycle of abuse and trauma and the wars and the violence that we have to go through, and how it's being passed on from generation to generation. Because I was thinking of course, I started writing this in 2017 when the Marawi siege happened, and then you have the declaration of martial law, and then of course I couldn't help but think of how it was then in the 70s, and especially since I was doing a 40-year-old woman's story. She's a martial law baby, of course. So I would have to reference that, and that also, I think that makes the characters and the wounds deeper for the mother and the daughter. So it was important for me to zero in on that and not just make it an abortion film, but actually talk about the struggles of women in a very violent environment, in a very violent country.
This ties right into that. This is a very stressful film.
Yeah.
Even the tiniest of sounds is somehow irritating in a story like this. It depicts how hard women's lives are in this society. The question I want to know is, how were you feeling during filming? And I might add, after spending, were you shooting during COVID? And did that affect, how you were feeling during filming?
That's why I said I wasn't even able to process what I shot during the day, because you have to think about the next day because it's consecutive shoots. So basically you get, 2 to 3 hours of sleep before you have to shoot again. And then, of course, everything, you get all the problems as well. And this was also campaign season of the election, so that was hard to do. So I had to give up a lot of the wide shots. But it was, just shooting it was very difficult because a lot of it was also from personal experience. So it was very triggering. There were a lot of times I would cry on set.
But were you really feeling like, oh, Max is so...
But Max was very supportive. The thing is, she understood what her character was going through at a very deep level. And I think she understood it more than I do because she's actually a mother.
Okay.
So she knows how it feels also. She was a very young mother.
Here's a tough question. Did you have to end with a miscarriage instead of an abortion for the censors?
No, that was my decision. Because, and it's not just because I don't want it to be an abortion film. It's because for me, the story is bigger than abortion. It was, I wanted to bring it back to the relationship between the mother and the daughter. And for me, it was a way to close the gap between them, like a space for healing between them, because at least now Alice understood what her mother had to go through, losing a daughter, not in the same way, but losing a child that she never actually wanted in the first place. And then Alice also ends up losing a child that she actually wanted to abort also. That was okay, finally I understand what my mother had to go through. That's why my last frame was also about her mother having the moment when she gave birth to Alice. So in the backdrop of, the war in Mindanao.
So for people like Alice, is there any choice at all? people like Alice, is there any choice? And what about the people who don't have the resources that
I
she
want to
did?
say that people like, not just people like Alice, but everyone should have the choice. But when you talk about choices, it's very complicated. It's not just, okay, you have a choice because you can afford it, you have contacts. It's a right, it's a human right, because I want to give back the agency, and maybe that's what needs to be talked about. It's not as easy as having an abortion law suddenly in the Philippines, but you still treat women the same way. And I mean, we've seen it happen in the US where they repealed abortion laws, and look where it's got us. We're back to fighting the same monsters. So maybe we need to actually talk about what needs to be what is the root of the problem. The root of the problem is women are not treated as equals. They're not treated as humans. They don't have agency. They are removed from that. It doesn't matter if they're financially well off or not, if they're educated. Of course, it factors in, but first and foremost, treat them as human beings who have agency.
Hear, hear.
Yeah.
Hear, hear. And I want to ask, because I think the audience would be really interested, your approach to sharing the film in the Philippines.
Oh yeah, well, because this is a very personal film, and for someone who also worked as an activist, my goal is really to have it seen more widely and make it accessible to communities who are in the front lines of fighting for women's rights. So I've had a few screenings, free screenings to NGOs who are like in the front lines also for fighting for women's rights, and who were actually doing all kinds of human rights work, not just for women. So yeah, those were the scariest screenings I ever attended. But yeah, a lot of them say it's kind of traumatic, that I should have put a trigger warning. And I'm like, oh, this is really tame. I really tamed it up. Like, you don't see any actual violence perpetrated by a man, like in full. Like we are so used to seeing rape scenes in movies and really violent stuff in movies. So I really tried to avoid that, and it still works. So you don't actually need to see it. I mean,
Yeah, our imagination is
Yeah,
far worse
yeah.
anyway. Yes. So those women's groups have helped get the conversation
yes.
started. Okay.
Yes. So, and even the men are actually quite surprised, because suddenly they realize they've been part of the problem. And these are from progressive groups. These are leftist activists, and it's so much harder when you discover that the men in the movement or in progressive movement can be quite sexist. So yeah, and it's kind of like a wake-up call for them too.
So how many of you felt that this film was a universal story? Could you just raise your hands, please? See?
Yeah.
She was very worried that it was so specific to the Philippines that no one would be able to really understand or even empathize properly, but I think that that's not the case at all.
Thank you.
Universal, and we really hope that you can bring it. I know you're talking to some distributors, and we really hope you can bring it to a much wider audience than just a few screenings. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Keep making films, please.
Yes. Cross fingers.
Once again, thank Anna Isabelle Matutina.
Thank you so much for staying.
And thank you very much for staying for the Q&A and for your questions. We hope to see you again.